welcome back to Azure Terraformer. It's release day. It's been a while since I've done a Terraform provider update, and so we've got a lot of catching up to do. But before I do that, I wanted to give a shout out to somebody who bought me a coffee on buymeacoffee.com. Anton, really appreciate the support, man. And trust me, the coffee will not go to waste. I caffeinate 2 times, sometimes 3 times a day. As those closest to me know, I go to Panera Bread a lot and get a lot of coffee. So appreciate it. And those of you that weren't aware, I do have a buymeacoffee.com account. It's posted, links posted in the comments here. So if you do want to support my caffeine habit, by all means, that's an avenue that you can do that. But without further ado, let's get back to the provider and let's go check out what's new. So we have, last time we looked at version 3.49. This time we're looking at 3.50. So we got a couple of new resources. We've got Azure Container App, and then we have PubSub custom certificate. So this custom certificate is like a sub resource for PubSub. And so that's pretty much it from a new features, new resources standpoint. Dependency. So let's look at our enhancements. So we have Databricks, Function App, Azure Monitor, SQL Database. So Function App. This is actually something I'm going to be using in an upcoming video. The zip deploy file feature on both the Linux Function App and the Windows Function App. So I'm definitely going to be using version 3.50 in future releases. I might go back and show you some of the other techniques that I've used to deploy to Azure functions, just so you can see the pain. But I've actually used this new attribute zip deploy file for some recent function apps that I've developed at work, and it works really good. So very excited to see that, and it is in 3.50, so that we'll see that going forward in future releases. Bug fixes, anything? Oh, before we go on, what do we got? SQL database, hyperscale SKUs, long-term retention policy, short-term retention policy. Okay. This is also a pattern that I use when configuring Azure Monitor. I usually have for my logs and metrics, I have a short-term retention policy and a long-term retention policy. This is, of course, related to SQL database. And then we have, what else we have? Azure subscription, or just some SDK updates and whatnot. Okay. So some bug fixes. Any interesting? Okay, so we have some healthcare service stuff, a bunch of API management stuff. So we're validating the PIP and subnet IDs, and we're validating the API management ID. So a lot of these API management resources, and I could spend probably 10 episodes just spelunking API management, but and all the ways and methods of using it. But a lot of these, this is one of those resources that has just a ton of sub resources to configure all the things, and they all link to each other using references to their parent object. So it looks like we're just adding some additional validation there. We got App Gateway, just adding some validation to some references. App Insights, again, same thing, just validation. What else do we have here? Lots and lots of validation that we're adding, which was probably just in the rush to get these resources out. They probably just kind of skipped the validation. So it's good to see that we're adding this validation back into these resources to make sure that they're working for us. Crashes. So function app crashes. So this is in the previous provider we looked at. We've been seeing some of these trickle out auth v2 on all the function apps. So it looks like there's some crashing with Active Directory authentication. That sounds like old school Active Directory, not not Azure AD. So, but still, probably a pain point. Log analytics, link services, Logic App. Logic App is not one that I've spent a lot of time developing Terraform for, just because it's one of those services that, kind of like Data Factory, where there's a lot of GUI, and it kind of feels like you're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole a little bit. So lots of validation. Let me see if I can fixing the network watcher, flow logs, which I have a network series coming up where we're going to be deploying a virtual WAN and some virtual hubs and probably some network watchers when we get into policy. So that'll be interesting to look at, to set up flow logs and observability on our network watchers and things like that. So that's good that they're fixing bugs there. Yeah. So a lot of validation. A new data source for container apps. So if you're deploying container apps, and then a sub resource for Azure PubSub, and then of course just a ton of validation. And then my favorite personal feature from this release 3.50 is the zip deploy file attribute on the Azure function. So let's move to 3.51. Okay, so in 3.51, what do we have? We have some breaking changes. The SKU tier no longer accepts the value paid. This is probably like a remnant from the days when AKS was a free service, kind of in beta mode. So a lot of times they start off with SKUs where they haven't really figured out the monetization strategy for the service, and they just have like a paid and a free tier, and that's it. And then they expand on like the different tiers of paid service. So we have a new resource for Arc Kubernetes cluster, an AKS Arc cluster. Looks like we have a resource group cost management view, which I definitely want to get to a series about cost management, budgets, and managing all that through Terraform. That should be some interesting topics, not only about how to automate that through Terraform, but also just interesting content about the platform. Looks like we have some SignalR sub-services or sub-resources for custom certificates, and Storage Mover. I saw this one come through, and I noticed Storage Mover start showing up in my storage account slices in the portal. So definitely this is one that I want to look at. I suspect it's something related to, moving storage, replicating data from between storage accounts is what I would guess. And then we've got, so looks like a cost management view at the resource group and the subscription level. And then yet another voice services resource, which we've seen these resources kind of trickle in previous provider updates. Let's just scan the enhancements to see if there's anything really interesting. Data collection rule. So data collection rules are, so it looks like there was for Azure Monitor, this data collection endpoint, which needed to be added. And it is always a pain when the resource supports it, but the data source doesn't support it. Because when you have downstream projects that need to reference stuff, it becomes a really pain in the butt. So it looks like we're cleaning up a lot of the data collection rule, data source attributes to make sure we're getting some of that stuff. It'd be really nice if we did the same for Cosmos DB. So we'll see about that. Azure app configuration feature. So we're adding additional properties there. We have a app port is now optional. Interesting. That must mean it must default to something. Then we have a few healthcare services for Fire, support patch, value for cores. That seems like an oversight. Interesting. AKS, what do we have for AKS? Katamish VM isolation. Interesting. So just like a VM isolation option for both a node pool and the cluster. This is probably for the default node pool. on the cluster resource, and then it's an attribute on the node pools that you can define later. And then actually it looks like the data collection rule has those same values added to the resource as well. So we're getting both these, the data collection endpoint ID and the identity and all these things on both the resource and the data source. So that's nice. And then SignalR, what do we got? I'd like to do a topic on how to develop applications using SignalR. So that's SignalR is a whole topic that I'd like to get into coming up. And probably a comparison between SignalR and PubSub, it seems like there might be some overlap between the use cases of those two services. So yeah, okay. What else do we have here? Bug fixes in 3.51. Azure app configuration keys, AKS. So we got some errors that are happening. It's not just validation this time. It looks like we're actually fixing a lot of errors. There is some validation going on here, and a lot of stuff related to auth v2 block within the Azure function service. So that's So that's 3.51. Let's go look at 3.52. So no new resources in 3.52. We do have some enhancements. It looks like we have some Golang SDK updates. Data source for Key Vault. Looks like this is a pure update to the Key Vault secret and certificate updates. Oh, this is nice. The Grafana dashboard has a user assigned identities block. I actually used this resource at work, and I did notice that only system assigned ID was working. So that's very nice that this has been added. Because there are some roles that you need there's some role assignments that are very useful to assign to Grafana. Because basically, when you set up a Grafana managed instance, it has to go out and reach and talk to different services to pull that data in. So it's the identity that your Grafana dashboard runs under is one of those things that you need to be able to assign role assignments to very easily. And then it looks like we have a whole bunch of function and web apps where we're updating the site credentials block to sensitive, and that looks pretty much it. Bug fixes, timeouts, AKS, enable host encryption was not properly set when resizing the default node pool. That's a baddie. Got a bunch of fixes to the auth v2 block again in our function apps. Storage mover. Interesting. So the resource providers, sometimes resource providers are not enabled by default in your subscription. And, sometimes when services move out of preview and move into GA, they shuffle around the resource provider that is needed, and it's just enabled by default. So I don't know if that's going on there. And this is a pretty important resource that we definitely don't want to have bug issues with that, because anytime you want to access subscription-based information, you're going to need that thing. So 3.52, not a lot going on there. Let's move to 3.53. Okay, so we have some new resources in 3.53. We have some cost management stuff coming in, scheduled action. Again, I'll have a series on cost management and using Terraform and configuring best practices all around that in an upcoming video. We got a bunch of new resources around Storage Mover, which usually when the primary resource gets dropped, you can expect the provider to add a bunch of sub resources later on. And this kind of gives an idea of what this service does. Looks like we have a source and a target. Makes sense when you're moving stuff point A to point B kind of thing. I'll definitely have to look at different use cases for Storage Mover and to tackle like AB and backup and disaster recovery type scenarios on Azure using Terraform in future videos. Bunch of SDK updates. I'm gonna have to go check some of the issues that I want to work on in the provider to see if any of these unblock me. I don't think so, but so we have a bunch of Linux function app stuff. Is it related to? And it's not the app stack. Or, I'm sorry, it's not the auth v2. It's actually the app stack for PHP, environment ID for kind of the slice of resources, and I think the same thing's going on with the Windows side of the house. SignalR service, skew zero capacity. That's interesting. So maybe SignalR has some different capacity values that needed to be enabled. So let's look at this. Bug fixes, CDN endpoint length limit for query string, cognitive account, custom question answering search service key. Interesting. I mean, I guess a key should be sensitive. Minor. I mean, that's more of a security issue that they're resolving there. Metric alert, fix a crash. Oof. Dynamic criteria, ignore data before. So this ignore data before on the dynamic criteria block was probably optional, and if you didn't set it, it would crash. That sounds like a lot of fun and a few hours of banging your head against the wall. Postgres, SQL, Flex server, point in time, restore. Okay, that seems pretty important. And then the search service, setting stuff sensitive. So not a lot of stuff going on. Expansion to the storage mover service sounds like the biggest thing happening in this release. Now let's go look at, I believe, the most recent one, 3.54. And here we are, 3.54. Now this one was just released yesterday, and we've got Arc AKS cluster extension resource. We got a Cosmos Postgres cluster email communication service. This has been a long time coming. Like AWS has had SES since I think the early days. I mean, if you're trying to run an online bookstore, you kind of need to send emails to customers. I think Azure for a long time, the default one was SendGrid, right? But a lot of times, if you were an Azure user, oftentimes you'd use SES as well. So I'm kind of wondering if this email communication service is Azure's SES. Kind of seems like it would be. It looks like both flavors of AKS have this extension added. More storage mover resources added to the mix, which I don't know a lot about that service yet, but I'm going to have to get into it. Let's look at enhancements. Get some SDK updates, virtual network gateway, data source, support for the private IP address. Seems kind of important, especially if you're going to be, whitelisting IPs. You're going to use a data source and get the private IP so you can whitelist. Active Directory Domain Service, ADDS, length up to 30 characters. Okay. I used this service when I was trying to help a customer set up Azure Virtual Desktop environments, and I don't think it's needed anymore. So the Azure Slack channel, the Azure Terraform Slack channel, there's a user on there that shared with me that they were doing AAD with Azure Virtual Desktop anyway. So nowadays, so it should be okay. The Attestation provider, more billing account, cost management. Cost management export. So this looks like a way to export your billing data, more maybe some FinOps automation going on there. A bunch of search service enhancements, service mesh profile block. That sounds like a fun thing to play with. Let's look at bug fixes. Yeah, just search service and attestation stuff. So today I'd say the big news would be the email service, AKS Extensions, and just continuing to blow out the storage mover service. So that's it. A lot of stuff has happened. I think that was about 4 different releases of the Terraform provider. So as you can see, changes come in every week, and there's quite a lot of them. But yeah, really appreciate you hanging out and looking at these providers. I try and look at them every week. I have looked at these, but I just didn't get a chance to make a video about them. Been pretty busy with other things, baseball seasons kicking off and all that. So yeah. But anyways, really appreciate your support. If you enjoy my channel, please subscribe and ring that bell. And again, just another shout out to my friend Anton for supporting me through buying me some coffees. Really appreciate that, man. Gonna try and caffeinate up and get some more videos made, and so I really appreciate it. Until next time, this is the Azure Terraformer, signing off.